My apartment is quiet, too quiet. I used to love silence. In it, I could think, work, read. Now it suffocates me like an invisible enemy. I turn on the radio to hear someone's voice and sit by the window. It's starting to rain outside, and I stare at Elizabeth's picture on the table. It's been 2 years, and I still talk to her. My name is Willis Huxley. I'm 67, and I taught physics to kids at Garden City College for 35 years until I retired. After Elizabeth died, I sold our house. I could no longer walk through rooms where every corner reminded me of her. Now I live in an apartment on the second floor of a 3-story building overlooking a small park. I feed the pigeons in the morning and watch old movies in the evening. Between these events is a void with nothing to fill. The phone rings, snapping me out of my daze. It's Lorna, my neighbor Perry's wife, inviting me over for tea. They're the only ones who bring me out of my shell on a regular basis. It's awkward to say no, and I don't want to be honest. Perry has a new pie, she says, and I can feel the smile in her voice. Blueberry. He says he's outdone himself. Half an hour later, I'm already sitting in their kitchen. Perry, a former accountant, found himself cooking after retirement and now experiments with new recipes every week. His pies are really good, though I'll never tell him that. He'd be too proud. How's Bryce? Lorna asks, pouring tea. I haven't seen him in a while. I sigh. My son, my pride and my pain at the same time. 36 years old, insurance appraiser, married to a woman who thinks I'm a burden. Busy as always, I answer, trying to keep my voice casual. Lots of work. Perry hums but doesn't say anything. He knows the truth that Bryce calls me once every 2 weeks, comes over on major holidays, and every conversation we have turns into an awkward recitation of news, as if we were distant relatives instead of father and son. After Elizabeth died, everything changed. Bryce had been there for the first few months, helping with the funeral, with the sale of the house, with the move. But then Odette started acting out. At first it was the little things. Bryce is so tired at work, he needs more rest at home. We have a family dinner planned, just the two of us. We're thinking about the baby. We need to focus on our little family. Odette came into Bryce's life 5 years ago. Tall, slender, with a perpetual half smile in which I immediately sensed something fake. Elizabeth said I was too hard on her, that I was just jealous of my son. Perhaps there was some truth to that, but I could see Bryce changing around her, becoming more distant, less joking, more accepting of other people's opinions. They bought a house, Perry said suddenly, taking a bite of pie. I freeze with my cup to my mouth. Who did? Your son and his wife. Perry looks at me surprised. Didn't he tell you? The house on Linden Avenue, the red brick one. They moved in last week. Lorna and I saw them when we went to the Martinsons. I slowly set my cup down on the table. Bryce bought the house and didn't tell me. My only son bought his first house, and I find out about it from the neighbors. I'm sure he wanted it to be a surprise, Lorna says softly, placing her hand on mine. Maybe they plan to invite you over when they get everything set up. Of course, I nod, even though we both know that's not true. I sit by the phone that evening, wondering if I should call Bryce. What am I going to say? I just happened to know you bought the house. Why didn't you tell me? It'll sound like an accusation, or maybe it is an accusation. Instead, I open up social media. Elizabeth insisted I set up an account to connect with former students, and now I'm using it to spy on my own son's life. There's a new post on Odette's page, a photo of her and Bryce in front of a red brick house, both smiling. Underneath the photo is the text, "New house, new life. We're waiting for all our friends for a housewarming party on Saturday." Among the comments with congratulations I see, and Odette's answers, "Yes, we start at 6 p.m. Bring only good mood, everything else is taken care of. I can't wait to see all of you in our new house. Everyone but me." I close my laptop and walk over to the window. The rain is still coming down, drumming on the eaves. What would Elizabeth say? Don't be so proud, Will. Just call him. But this isn't about pride. It's about the fact that every time I try to be a part of their lives, Odette builds a new wall. I remember the day I first noticed something was wrong. Bryce brought Odette over to meet us. They had only been dating for a few months at the time. Elizabeth made dinner, and I opened the bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. At the table, Odette smiled, answering questions politely, but I could feel the tension in her. And then Bryce started talking about his childhood, about our family tradition of going camping every summer, and I saw Odette's face change, as if a door had slammed shut. From then on, it happened again and again, every time I tried to share memories of Bryce's past. Every time my son and I started talking about something that brought us together but excluded her. Gradually, Odette started changing plans at the last minute when we made an appointment. Or Bryce would call and apologize that they couldn't make it to dinner because Odette wasn't feeling well. Or they suddenly had other plans. After Elizabeth's death, these tactics became even more obvious. I pour myself a whiskey, just a little, just to warm me up. Lately, I've noticed I've been doing it more often than I should. Elizabeth wouldn't approve. "You weren't invited, Willis," I say to myself. "Accept it with dignity." But then I remember something else. A month ago, during one of our rare calls, Bryce mentioned in passing that Odette had gotten a new job. "An administrative position at Rivers Enterprises," he said proudly. "Much better pay than the dental clinic and growth prospects." Rivers Enterprises, Osmond Rivers' company, an old friend of mine. He and I went to university together. Then our paths diverged. He went into business, I into teaching. But we've kept in touch over the years, meeting every few months for a beer and to reminisce about our youth. Osmond is a man of principles. His company is known not only for its success, but also for its strict corporate ethics. "Family values and respect are the foundation of everything," he liked to say. I wonder if Odette knows that her new boss is an old friend of mine. I doubt Bryce mentioned it. He's always been careful to keep different parts of his life separate, especially in recent years. I'm looking at my phone. I could call Osmond, tell him what's going on, but tell him what exactly? That my son and daughter-in-law didn't invite me to the housewarming party? That sounds pathetic. Osmond will sympathize, say some comforting words, and that's it. No, if I'm going to call him, it's not now and it's not about that. I'm not going to use friendship to solve family problems, at least not yet. My gaze drops to the calendar. Saturday, the day after tomorrow. I have 2 days to decide what to do. Common sense says stay home, preserve my dignity. But an inner voice that sounds suspiciously like Elizabeth's whispers, "You're his father, Willis. You have a right to be a part of his life." I finish my whiskey and go to sleep, but I toss and turn for a long time, unable to fall asleep. There's a thought I can't get out of my head. What if I just show up to this party uninvited? What's the worst that could happen? Odette wouldn't be happy? She's already unhappy with my existence. Bryce would be embarrassed? Maybe. But maybe he'll also be secretly happy to see me. I can almost hear Elizabeth saying, "Don't do anything stupid, Will." And at the same time, I imagine her sly smile. As I fall asleep, I still don't know what I'm going to choose. But somewhere deep inside, a decision is already ripening that will change not only this weekend, but my entire life. On Saturday, I woke up with a firm resolve. If Bryce didn't invite me to the housewarming party, I would invite myself. A thought that seemed insane just yesterday took shape today and turned into a plan. I spent the morning going through Elizabeth's things that I'd kept in boxes until now. I needed an appropriate gift. What do you get at a housewarming party? Plants, linens, dishes. It all seemed too mundane. I wanted to find something special, something that mattered. In one of the boxes, I found an old silver picture frame, a gift from my parents for Elizabeth and me at our wedding. A beautiful handmade piece finely engraved. We kept our wedding photo in it until the frame faded with time, and Elizabeth replaced it with a more modern one. I polished the silver to a high shine. The perfect gift, a piece of family history that Bryce could continue in his new home. Toward evening, I began to get ready. Wore my best tweed jacket that Elizabeth had given me for my 60th birthday, a dark blue shirt, gray slacks. I combed my hair especially carefully, trying to hide the bald spots. The mirror reflected an elderly man trying to look presentable. I can't say I was impressed, but I did my best. Bryce and Odette's house was a 20-minute walk from my apartment. I could have taken a cab, but I decided to walk. I needed to gather my thoughts. It was a clear evening, with a light breeze. I walked down the quiet streets of Garden City, clutching the neatly wrapped photo frame in my hand, and rehearsed in my head what I was going to say. "Congratulations on your housewarming. Sorry for the intrusion. Just wanted to congratulate you in person. The house turned out to be exactly as I'd envisioned. 2 stories, red brick, with a small manicured garden. A typical house for a young middle-class family. The windows glowed with warm light, and music and laughter came from the open windows. Several cars were parked in the driveway. The guests had already gathered. I stopped at the gate, suddenly hesitant. Maybe this was a bad idea after all, but it was too late to back out. I took a deep breath and went to the door. The bell rang with a melodic chime inside the house. The door was opened by Bryce, wearing a light blue shirt, a glass of wine in his hand, smiling. His smile froze when he saw me. "Dad?" His voice was quiet. His eyes widened in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I came to wish you a happy housewarming." I tried to keep my voice casual and held out a package to him. "It's for you and Odette. A little gift." Bryce took it awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot. "Thank you, but we weren't expecting you. I mean, we didn't think you'd be not interested in my only son's housewarming party?" I smiled, pretending not to notice his embarrassment. "May I come in? Or do you prefer your old man freezing on the doorstep?" It wasn't a fair trick, but it worked. Bryce stepped back, letting me into the house. "Sure, come on in. It's just..." Odette might be a little surprised. Inside, the house looked even better than the outside. A spacious hallway with wood paneling on the walls, a bright living room where 15 people were already gathered. Fancy furniture, minimalist design. Odette's taste was evident. Nothing of the cozy clutter that had prevailed in our family home when Bryce was growing up. I looked around at the guests, mostly young couples around Bryce and Odette's age, a few older people, probably co-workers. Many of the faces were familiar to me from photos on social media, but this was the first time I'd seen these people in person. Odette stood in the center of the living room talking to 2 women. She was tall, slender, wearing an elegant beige dress with perfectly styled blonde hair. When she noticed me, her face changed. Her smile disappeared, her eyes narrowed. She said something to her companions and walked briskly toward us. "Willis," she said, not hiding her surprise. "What a surprise." "A pleasant one, I hope," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Congratulations on your new home. It's a beautiful place." "Thank you." She smiled strained and turned to Bryce. "Darling, would you introduce me to the Martins? They just got here." It was an obvious maneuver to get my husband away from me. Bryce looked at me with an apologetic look. "Dad, make yourself at home. Appetizers are on the table. Drinks are at the bar. I'll be right back." And they left, leaving me alone in the hallway. I took a deep breath, holding back my irritation. What had I expected? For Odette to rush over and hug me? I made my way into the living room and took a glass of wine from the tray. Several guests looked in my direction curiously, but no one approached. I felt out of place, like an old couch in the midst of modern furnishings. The house was tastefully furnished, but impersonal, like a page from a furniture store catalog. Nothing personal, nothing that told a story. Not a single family photo, not a single book Bryce had loved as a child, not a single item inherited from previous generations. I slowly made my way around the first-floor rooms, looking at my son's new abode. The kitchen was striking with modern appliances Elizabeth could only dream of. The dining room looked as if it had never been eaten in. Perfectly arranged chairs, impeccable service. A small office at the end of the corridor with a neat desk and empty shelves was the only place that looked as if it had not yet been cleaned. On the desk were papers and Bryce's laptop. Back in the living room, I noticed a middle-aged woman watching me with a slight smile. She approached, extending her hand. "You must be Bryce's father. I'm Helen, Odette's roommate from the previous apartment. We haven't been introduced, but the resemblance is obvious. Willis Huxley." I shook her hand. "Nice to meet you." "I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here," she said, sipping from her glass. "Odette said that you two don't get along very well." "Did she?" I raised an eyebrow. "What exactly did she say?" Helen looked embarrassed, clearly regretting what she'd said. "Nothing specific. Just, I got the impression that things were tense. Families can be complicated," I answered evasively, "especially when daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law show up." She laughed and the tension eased. Oh, I understand. I have 3 kids myself, all married. Sometimes family dinners turn into diplomatic negotiations. We talked some more about Garden City, about how the city was changing, about her children. Helen was a pleasant conversationalist, but I sensed she was avoiding talking about Odette and Bryce in my presence. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Odette watching us, standing at the other end of the room. She said something to Bryce, and he quickly walked over to us. "Dad, I see you've already met Helen," he said, trying to sound casual. "Would you like me to show you the house?" It was an obvious attempt to draw me away from the other guests, but I didn't resist. We went up to the second floor, where Bryce quickly showed me the bedrooms and bathrooms. Everything was as impersonal as it was downstairs. "This is where the nursery will be," he said, opening the door to an empty room painted a soft yellow. "Someday, are you planning a baby?" I asked, feeling my heart clench. Elizabeth had so dreamed of grandchildren. "Not yet," Bryce answered quickly. "Odette wants to build a career first, and we just moved in. We need to get settled in." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Up until a few years ago, we could talk to my son about anything. Now every conversation was like dancing through a minefield. "Bryce," I began as we walked back downstairs, "why didn't you tell me about the house?" He stopped on the steps without looking at me. "I was going to. It's just, it all happened so fast. We saw the listing, fell in love with the house, took out a mortgage, then the move, the renovations. There was no time. No time to make a phone call?" I tried not to sound accusatory, but I guess I didn't succeed. "Dad, don't start," Bryce sighed. "Not today, okay? We're having a party." I corrected. "You're having a party that I wasn't invited to." Bryce finally looked at me, a mixture of guilt and annoyance in his eyes. "Odette thought you wouldn't be interested, that it was hard for you to be around big groups after your mom died." "Did you? What did you think?" "Yeah," he hesitated. I didn't want to argue with her. We went down to the living room, where the guests were already in small groups. Odette stood by the fireplace, surrounded by listeners. Her voice, ringing and confident, overlapped the background music. The principal said I was just the person they were looking for. "You have potential, Ms. Huxley," he said. "I have a meeting with the department heads as early as next week, and I'll be overseeing a few projects." She was talking about her new job at the Osmond Company, not realizing I was listening. Her face was glowing with pride, her hands moving expressively, emphasizing every word. This Odette was very different from the cold woman who'd met me at the door. Bryce looked at his wife with undisguised admiration. I remembered the way he'd looked at his mother, with the same expression of absolute certainty that everything would be okay as long as she was around. He'd looked at me that way once too. "Amazing," someone in the audience said. "Rivers Enterprises is one of the most prestigious companies in the state. Mr. Rivers personally signed my contract." Odette paused for effect. "He said he saw me as the spirit of the company." I could barely keep from laughing. The Osmond Rivers I knew never used such pathos. He was straightforward to the point of rudeness. Company spirit sounded like a phrase from a corporate brochure, not the words of a living person. Bryce noticed my reaction and frowned. "What?" "Nothing," I shook my head. It's funny to hear about Osmond in that context." "Do you know Mr. Rivers?" Bryce looked at me in surprise. "Of course I do. We've been friends since college. We meet once a month for a beer, to reminisce about our youth." Bryce's face changed, pale, as if I'd told him he was terminally ill. "You're friends with Odette's boss?" His voice was almost a whisper. "And you never talked about it?" "And you never asked," I shrugged. "Besides, I didn't know she'd taken a job with his company until you mentioned the name a month ago." "Why would I have told you? Did it make any difference?" From the look on his son's face, it did, and a lot. "Odette doesn't know," he said, looking around, as if afraid his wife might hear. "Don't tell her, please. She'd be upset if she knew her assignment might have something to do with—" "To what?" I looked at him in surprise. "You think I put in a good word for her? Osmond doesn't even know she's your wife. I didn't mention it." Bryce looked uncertain, but relaxed a little. "Still, it's best not to tell her. She's very proud that she got the job on her own merit." I nodded, though I was inwardly annoyed. My son had asked me to keep secrets from his wife in my own home. No, their home, where I was unwelcome. I spent the rest of the evening watching Odette and Bryce from the sidelines. They played the roles of gracious hosts perfectly. She was radiant, he was supportive. Together, they gave the impression of a perfect couple in a perfect home. But I could see the tension between them, especially when Odette noticed I was talking to one of the guests for too long. Toward 10 p.m., I decided it was time to leave. I found Bryce in the kitchen, where he was making coffee. "I think I'll be going now," I said. "Thanks for tonight. The house is really great." Bryce nodded without looking at me. "Thanks for coming," he said mechanically. "Thanks for the gift, too." I waited for him to offer to walk me out, but he kept fiddling with the coffee pot. I took the hint. "Give Odette my best wishes," I said, heading for the exit. Be happy, son." Bryce looked up, something in his eyes, sorry, guilt, but he just nodded. I walked out into the hallway where I ran into Odette. She was talking to an elderly couple, apparently seeing them off. When she saw me, she tensed up. "Leaving already, Willis?" she asked with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Yes, it's time to do the honors," I replied, pulling on my coat. "It's been a lovely evening. You and Bryce are wonderful hosts." "Thank you." She tilted her head slightly. "It was unexpected to see you tonight." I smiled, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm full of surprises, dear sister-in-law. So is life." I had already grabbed the doorknob when I heard a voice behind me. Odette's loud, clear voice, clearly meant for everyone here. Amazing, isn't it? Some people just don't understand when they weren't invited. I froze without turning around. The living room behind me was suddenly quiet. The music continued to play, but the talking had stopped. I knew that every eye was on me and Odette. "Honey," Bryce's voice was quiet. "Let's not—" "What?" Odette interrupted him. "I shouldn't talk about the obvious? That your father showed up uninvited to a party he wasn't invited to on purpose?" I turned around slowly. Odette was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed over her chest, chin raised defiantly. Bryce stood beside her, pale with the guilty expression I hated to see on my son. The guests were shifting uncomfortably, some pretending to be engrossed in their drinks, others blatantly watching the scene unfold. "Odette," I said quietly, "I was just leaving." "Oh, how fortunate." She splashed her hands theatrically. "But first I want everyone to know that we didn't invite you, Willis, and for good reason." "Honey," Bryce put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. "No, Bryce, that's enough. I'm tired of this." She turned back to me. "You know, Willis, I tried. I really tried. But you never gave me a chance. From the beginning, you looked down on me. Didn't think I was good enough for your precious son." I stood there not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to object, to say it wasn't like that. But wasn't it? Hadn't I really ever given her a chance? Hadn't I sensed from the beginning that she wasn't the woman I wanted by Bryce's side? "And now you've shown up uninvited to ruin our party," Odette continued. "Our first real house that we bought on our own. Without your help, without your advice. Because every time Bryce takes your advice, it ends in disaster." I looked at my son. He stood with his eyes down, not daring to look at me. Did he really believe that? Did he really think my advice had led him to some kind of disaster? "Bryce," I called out, "is it true?" He looked up, and what I saw in his eyes struck me more than anything Odette had said. Not anger, not shame, not even regret. Emptiness. It was as if he'd shut himself off from everything that was happening with an invisible wall. "You'd better go, Daddy," he said quietly. At that moment, something broke inside me. Not because of Odette's words after all. What else could I expect from her? But because of the emptiness in my son's eyes. Because he'd allowed his wife to humiliate me publicly and couldn't find the strength to stand up for me. "Did you hear that?" Odette said triumphantly. "Bryce wants you to leave. This is our home, and you are not welcome here. You've invaded our lives for the last time, Willis." I looked around the room. The guests were looking anywhere but at me. Some looked embarrassed, others secretly pleased with the unexpected drama. The elderly couple at the window, the same people Odette had been talking to in the hallway, were looking at me with obvious sympathy. I could have made a scene. I could have responded to Odette, blamed her for everything that had come to a head over the years. I could have tried to get through to Bryce, make him choose between us, but something told me he'd already made his choice. Okay, I said simply. Odette blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. Okay? Yeah, I nodded. You're right, I'm leaving. I turned toward the door, feeling the stares of everyone there. My hand found the doorknob on its own. Opening the door, I heard Odette whisper behind me, "That's it? You're just going to leave?" She wanted a fight, wanted me to give her a reason to look like a victim. I didn't give her that pleasure. The evening air was cool after the stuffy living room. I inhaled deeply, feeling the rage bubbling inside subside, giving way to a cold, calculating anger. I stepped off the porch and walked down the path without turning around. It wasn't until I was outside under a streetlight that I stopped. I pulled out my cell phone and scrolled through my contacts. Osmond Rivers. The last time we'd seen each other was 3 weeks ago, in our usual pub. Osmond was in a good mood. His company had just landed an important contract, and he felt on top of the world. He'd always been like that, assertive, energetic, successful, the complete opposite of me, a humble physics teacher. I pressed the call button. After the third ring, Osmond answered. "Willis?" He sounded surprised. "Is something the matter? You never call this late." "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you have a minute?" "Always for you." "What's up?" I told him briefly what had happened. The housewarming party I wasn't invited to. How Odette had publicly humiliated me. About how Bryce had stood there and watched without saying a word in my defense. "Wait," Osmond interrupted me. "Odette? Odette Huxley? The one we recently hired for an administrative position?" "Yes, my sister-in-law," I confirmed. "You didn't know?" "I had no idea," Osmond whistled. "She didn't mention any family ties. She put her maiden name on her resume. And I didn't connect her to you. How many Huxleys are there in the world?" I wasn't surprised. Of course, Odette did her best to hide the connection. She was always trying to separate Bryce from me, to create a new life for him, a new family where I had no place. "What exactly did she tell you?" Osmond asked. There was a hard edge to his voice. I recounted her words, trying to be precise. Osmond's voice grew colder with each word. "You know, Willis," he said at last, "I've always appreciated that you're a gentleman, even in the most difficult situations. But sometimes that quality works against you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some people deserve a lesson, and your sister-in-law seems to be one of them." "Osmond," I began uncertainly, "I don't want you to—" "Where are you now?" He interrupted me. "In the street near Bryce's house." "What's the address?" I gave the address, though a part of me resisted. I wasn't sure I wanted to drag Osmond into this situation, but at the same time, wasn't that why I'd called him? "All right," Osmond said. "Go back to the party." "What?" I was stunned. "Why?" "I've been kicked out, in case you haven't noticed." You go back, say you forgot something, or just come in and pretend like nothing happened. Odette's gonna be pissed. But what's she gonna do? Call the police to escort her husband's elderly father out? "I'm not sure." "Willis," Osmond's voice became serious. "In our 40 years of friendship, you've never asked for anything from me. You've never taken advantage of our relationship. Let me do this for you." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to just go home, lick my wounds in silence. But the other part, the part that was seething with rage and humiliation, wanted to see Odette get what she deserved. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Osmond said. "Just be there." He disconnected without waiting for my answer. I stood under the streetlight, staring at the phone in my hand as if it might give me an answer. What am I doing? Am I doing the right thing by bringing Osmond into this situation? Osmond Rivers wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a man of principles, sometimes to the point of fanaticism. Rivers Enterprises was famous not only for its financial success, but also for its special corporate culture. Osmond believed that business should not only be profitable, but also ethical. He set strict rules for his employees, and one of the main ones was respect for the older generation. "Our parents and grandfathers built the world we live in," he liked to say. "They deserve our respect not because they are older, but because they paved the way for us." This philosophy was no idle sound. Osmond's company had a whole system of values, and employees were evaluated not only on their professional qualities, but also on their conformity to those values. Osmond could forgive a mistake in work, but never a violation of ethical principles. And now he learned that one of his new employees had publicly humiliated an elderly man. And not just any old man, but an old friend of his, her husband's father. I knew what was coming. Osmond had no tolerance for such behavior. To him, it was not just a personal insult, but a violation of everything he believed in. I turned and looked at Bryce and Odette's house. The windows were still lit up. The music was playing. The party was going on as if nothing had happened. Like I was never even there. 40 minutes. Osmond said he'd be there in 40 minutes. What am I going to do in the meantime? Stand here in the street like a beaten dog? Or go home and forget all about it? No, I wasn't going to run away. Not this time. I determinedly headed back towards the house. When I reached the door, I didn't ring the bell. I just turned the knob. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside as if I had every right to do so. There was no one in the hallway. I took off my coat and hung it on the coat rack, next to the other guest coats, as if I were one of them. Then I made my way into the living room. The first person to notice me was Bryce. He was talking to some man, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. When he saw me, he froze, his face pale. The man he was talking to followed his gaze and saw me too. He asked Bryce something, but he didn't seem to hear. Gradually, the other guests began to notice me. Conversations died down and heads turned in my direction. I stood at the entrance to the living room, calm and straight, meeting stares without embarrassment. Odette was standing by the fireplace, laughing at something a tall man in a gray suit was saying to her. She didn't immediately notice the change in the atmosphere in the room. When the man stopped talking and looked in my direction, she turned around. Her face changed. Her smile disappeared. Her eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with anger. She set her glass aside and walked toward me across the room with a quick stride. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, coming in close. "I thought we'd cleared this up." "I forgot something," I said calmly. "Sarahanim, what was that?" "My dignity," I said, looking her straight in the eye. But I went back for it. She looked at me with such frank contempt that I almost admired her courage. Most people would not have dared to dislike the father of their spouse so openly. "Go away," she said quietly but firmly. "Now, or I'll call the police." "Do you really want a scandal, Odette?" I asked. "Police, sirens, neighbors looking out the windows. Not the best start to life in a new house, is it?" She hesitated, and I could see her mind racing with options. Finally, she turned to Bryce, who had walked over to us. "Bryce," she said, "your father refuses to leave. Do something about it. My son looked lost." He shifted his gaze from me to my wife and back again, clearly unsure of what to do. "Dad," he finally said, "please. You're only making it worse." "Worse for who, Bryce?" I asked. "For me? Or for you?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything I needed to know. For him. I was making things worse for him, embarrassing him in front of his wife and friends. "You don't understand," I said quietly, for his ears only. "But soon you will." Odette, seeing our quiet conversation, intervened. "That's enough," she said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone present. "Willis, you're ruining our party. You're ruining our lives with your constant interference. I'm asking you for the last time. Leave." "Don't worry," I replied. "I'm in no hurry. I'm waiting for a guest." "A guest?" She frowned. "What guest?" "You'll see," I smiled. "I think it's going to be a surprise." Bryce looked at me with growing concern. He knew me well enough to realize something was wrong. I'd never been a vindictive person, never responded to rudeness with rudeness. But today something was different, and he could sense it. "Dad," he began, but Odette interrupted him. "No, Bryce, enough talk." She turned to the guests who were still watching us. "I apologize for this little misunderstanding. Keep having fun, please." She took Bryce's hand and led him away to the other end of the room, throwing one last warning glance at me. I was left standing at the entrance, feeling strangely calm. The guests gradually returned to their conversations, though many continued to cast curious glances in my direction. I took a glass of wine from the tray of a passing waiter and found a quiet corner from which I could watch the scene while remaining relatively inconspicuous, and waited. Osmond said he would be in 40 minutes. I looked at my watch. It was only 15. The time dragged agonizingly slow. I stood in the corner of the living room, watching as if I were watching a movie, detached and mildly curious. Bryce and Odette carefully avoided looking in my direction, still playing the role of welcoming hosts, but I could see the tension in my son's shoulders and the fake smile on Odette's face as she cast irritated glances in my direction. The guests, sensing the strange atmosphere, gradually began to say goodbye. By 10:30, there were no more than 10 people left in the house, the closest friends or those who were too intrigued by the ongoing drama to leave. When the doorbell rang, Odette gave me a piercing look, as if suspecting it had something to do with me. She was right. Bryce went to open it. I heard voices in the hallway, the son's surprised voice and Osmond's deep, confident voice. A moment later, they entered the living room. Osmond looked exactly the way a CEO of a large company should look, tall, trim, in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit. His gray hair was neatly slicked back, the wrinkles around his eyes giving his face an expression of wisdom. He radiated confidence and strength, filling the room with his presence. "Good evening," he said, looking around the room. "I apologize for my late visit. My name is Osmond Rivers." I saw Odette's face change from annoyance to surprise, then to shock as she realized who was standing in front of her. Her boss, the CEO of the company where she just started working. "Mr. Rivers!" She walked quickly over to him, extending her hand. "What a pleasant surprise. I'm Odette Huxley." "I know who you are," Osmond replied, shaking her hand. "You've recently joined our team. Administrative director, if I'm not mistaken." "That's right," Odette brightened. "I didn't expect to see you here. Have you met Bryce?" "I didn't have the pleasure until tonight." Osmond turned to my son. "I've heard a lot about you from your father, though." Bryce gave me a quick glance that read bewilderment and concern. "Do you know my father?" he asked, even though I'd already told him that. "Willis is one of my oldest friends." Osmond smiled across the room at me. "We went to university together." "How long ago was that, Will?" 45 years ago?" 47, I corrected, walking over to them. Osmond put his arm around me, patting me on the back like an old battle buddy. "This man," he turned to the other guests, "saved me from imminent failure in physics. If it hadn't been for his patience, I would never have finished university." The guests smiled, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. Odette looked as if someone had poured a bucket of ice water down her scruff. Bryce stood pale, shifting his gaze from me to Osmond and back again. "Mr. Rivers," Odette began, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is such an honor. Can I get you something to drink?" "Scotch if you have it," Osmond replied. "And please, call me Osmond. We're not at work." Odette quickly brought him a drink, fussing over him as if he were royalty visiting their humble abode. Osmond accepted the glass of scotch and took a sip, nodding approvingly. "Excellent choice," he said. "I see you have good taste." He looked around, examining the house. It's a lovely place. How long have you lived here?" "Just a week," Bryce said. "We, just moved in." "And you're having a housewarming party?" "Impressive." Osmond took another sip. "When I bought my first house, it took me months just to sort through the boxes." Everyone laughed. The tension eased a little. Osmond had a gift for making people feel comfortable in his presence, despite his status. "So you're friends with Bryce's father?" asked one of the guests, an older woman I remembered as the one who looked at me with sympathy. "More than friends," Osmond replied. "Almost brothers. We've been through a lot together. Willis was there for me when I started my business, when I got married, when I had children. He even loaned me money back when Rivers Enterprises was just a dream and a couple of desks in a rented garage." I saw Odette's eyes widen. She didn't know that part of the story, didn't know that the company she was so proud to work for existed in part because of me. "Willis never told us about it," Bryce said, giving me an odd look. "He's modest," Osmond put a hand on my shoulder. "He always has been. But I owe him a lot. Not just the money, which, by the way, I paid back with interest," he grinned, "but the moral support, the philosophy that formed the basis of my company." "Philosophy?" Odette asked, trying to look interested. Osmond nodded, his face serious. "Rivers Enterprises is not just a business. It's a system of values. And one of the core values is respect for the older generation. The room fell silent. Odette froze with her glass in her hand, her smile strained. Interesting, she said. Yeah, I share those values. You do? Osmond raised an eyebrow. I'm glad to hear it. Not everyone these days understands the importance of respecting their elders, especially young people who think the world began with their birth. He paused, looking around the room. You know, my company has been around for 30 years. A lot has changed in that time. Technology, the market, competition. But our core principles have remained the same, and one of them is family values. The guest nodded, not understanding what he was getting at, but sensing that the conversation was taking a serious turn. I believe that business should be ethical, Osmond continued, that success is not measured by money alone. What matters more is the kind of people we are, how we treat each other, especially those who are older than us, who have paved the way for us. He turned to Odette, looking her straight in the eye. When I hire new employees, I look not only at their professional qualities, but also at their character, how they treat their parents, how they treat the elderly, because that says more about them than any resume. Odette paled. She was beginning to realize where the conversation was going. Bryce looked worried too, his eyes darting between me, Osmond, and his wife. Tell us more about your company, the other guest asked, clearly unaware of the growing tension. Osmond smiled at her. With pleasure. Rivers Enterprises started out as a small consulting firm. Now we have over 2,000 employees nationwide. We advise major corporations on management, marketing, finance. He took a sip of scotch. But you know what's interesting? Despite our growth, we maintain a family atmosphere. I know the names of most of the employees. I know their family histories, because it's important to me that everyone in the company shares our values. Osmond walked over to the fireplace, looking at the photos on the mantelpiece. There were pictures of Bryce and Odette, of their friends, of Odette's parents. But there were no pictures of Elizabeth or me. Interesting, he said, as if by chance. I don't see any pictures of Bryce's parents. All eyes turned to the owners of the house. Bryce coughed awkwardly. We haven't unpacked everything yet, he said. Putty. Bryce's mom died 2 years ago, Odette added, as if that explained the absence of my pictures too. I'm sorry, Osmond turned to Bryce. Losing a parent is hard. It's all the more important to appreciate those who are left behind. Bryce nodded, not looking at me or Osmond. You know, Osmond continued, now addressing the crowd, we have a tradition at our company. Every year we have Family Day. Employees come with their parents, spouses, children. It helps us remember that behind every professional is a person with a history, with roots. He turned to Odette. You're a recent addition to our staff, Odette. I hope to see you at the next Family Day, with your husband and, of course, your father-in-law. Odette looked like she was about to fall through the floor. She opened her mouth to say something, but Osmond didn't give her the chance. Do you know what else is interesting about our corporate culture? He asked. The way we approach conflict. I believe that any conflict can be resolved if both sides show respect and a willingness to listen. He paused, looking around the room as if gauging the audience's reaction. But there are some things I find unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. And one of them is disrespect for the older generation. The room fell into silence. Even the music seemed to become quieter, although no one touched the stereo. Everyone present sensed that something important was happening, though not everyone realized what it was. Osmond set his glass on the mantelpiece and turned to Odette. Miss Huxley, he said, and there was no warmth left in his voice. When we hired you, we looked at your resume, your experience, your references, but it turns out we missed something important. Odette turned even paler, if that was possible. What do you mean? She asked in a shaky voice. I mean that you didn't indicate on your form that your father-in-law is an old friend of mine, Osmond replied. Not that it was necessary, but now I wonder why. Bryce stepped forward as if trying to get between his wife and Osmond. Mr. Rivers, he began, but Osmond raised a hand to stop him. I'm not talking to you, young man. I'm talking to your wife. He turned to Odette again. So why did you withhold this information? Yeah, I didn't. Odette licked her lips nervously. I just didn't think it was work-related. Not work-related? Osmond raised an eyebrow. The fact that your husband's father is one of my closest friends, the founder of the company you want to work for, is irrelevant? The guests began to glance around. Someone coughed awkwardly. The atmosphere in the room became tense to the extreme. I think perhaps we should discuss this at another time, Odette muttered, glancing at the remaining guests. Why? Osmond asked. Are you embarrassed? Or perhaps afraid that your friends will find out how you treat your father-in-law? The room was now completely silent. All eyes were on Odette, who looked like she'd been cornered. I don't know what you mean, she said finally. Willis and I we have a complicated relationship. Complicated relationship, Osmond repeated. That's an interesting way of putting it. What would you call what happened tonight? When you publicly humiliated an elderly man? When you kicked your husband's father out the door in front of everyone present? Odette turned even paler, if that was possible. She glanced at Bryce as if looking for support, but my son looked like he needed help himself. The guests glanced around, and some began to quietly make their way toward the exit, feeling uncomfortable in the midst of the family uproar. It was a misunderstanding, Odette muttered. A misunderstanding? Osmond grinned. No, Ms. Huxley, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, willful humiliation of a man who deserved your respect. Not because of his age, though that too. It was because he's your husband's father. The man who had raised and nurtured Bryce made him the man you had come to love. Osmond turned to the other guests. I apologize for intruding on family matters. But you see, I cannot stand by when principles that are sacred to me are violated. He looked at Odette again. There is a rule in my company. We don't work with people who don't respect the older generation. It's an immutable law on which our entire corporate culture is built. Bryce stepped forward. Mr. Rivers, please, he began, but Osmond stopped him again with a gesture. I understand your desire to protect your wife, he said. It is commendable. But where was that desire when she humiliated your father? Where was your defense then? Bryce lowered his head, unable to find the words to answer. I felt a pang of regret. I didn't want my son to suffer, but maybe that lesson was necessary. You know what the saddest part is? Osmond continued, now addressing everyone present. That we forget a simple truth. How we treat our elders is how the next generation will treat us. It's a law of life as immutable as the laws of physics that Willis taught his students. He turned to Odette, his gaze cold and assessing. I am forced to reconsider your position in the company, Ms. Huxley. A man who has no respect for his own family cannot be part of our corporate family. The guest gasped. Bryce stepped forward, his face contorted with alarm. Mr. Rivers, please, he said. Don't punish Odette for a family conflict. It's unfair. Unfair? Osmond raised an eyebrow. What's fair, young man? The way she treats your father? Do you think that's fair? Bryce stood, eyes downcast, unable to find an answer to Osmond's question. The silence in the room became almost palpable. The guests froze in awkward poses, not knowing whether they should stay and witness what was happening or whether it was better to leave quietly. I think we should continue this conversation privately, Odette finally said, trying to maintain some dignity. This is neither the time nor the place. On the contrary, Osmond replied, his voice firm. It is now, and it is here. You were not ashamed to publicly humiliate Willis in front of all the guests. Why should I be ashamed to speak of it? He turned to the others present. I apologize for the awkwardness, but I think some things should be said openly. I came here today not as the CEO of Rivers Enterprises, but as a friend of Willis Huxley, and I have witnessed behavior that I find unacceptable. Osmond took a few steps into the center of the room, as if taking the stage. Tonight I witnessed Odette Huxley, an employee of my company, publicly humiliate an elderly man. Not just any elderly person, but her husband's father, a man who had come to congratulate them on their housewarming. All eyes turned to Odette, who stood with her hand to her throat, her eyes widening in horror. It's not, she began, but Osmond continued, ignoring her attempt to object. I heard her tell him that he was unwelcome in their home, how she accused him of trying to ruin their feast, how she demanded that he leave, in front of everyone present. Osmond paused, looking around the room. Many of the guests lowered their eyes, not wanting to meet his gaze. They had witnessed the scene and knew he was telling the truth. In my company, Osmond continued, we hold certain values. One of them is respect for the older generation. That's not just words in a corporate brochure. It's the principle on which all our work is based. He turned to Odette again, his gaze cold and assessing. Ms. Huxley, your behavior today has shown me that you don't share those values, that you are not the right person to represent Rivers Enterprises. Odette's lips quivered as she began to realize where this conversation was going. Mr. Rivers, she said in a shaky voice, I'm asking you not to jump to conclusions. You have only seen one moment, one episode. You don't know the whole story of our relationship with Willis. I don't? Osmond raised an eyebrow. I've known Willis for almost 50 years. I was at his wedding. I held his son in my arms when he was an infant. I visited him when Elizabeth died. I think I know him well enough. He took a step toward Odette, his voice quieter but no less threatening. And I know Willis would never have given me a reason to talk about him the way you did today, would never make me feel unwelcome, because he's a man with a sense of self-worth and respect for others. Bryce finally came out of his daze and stepped forward. Mr. Rivers, I understand your outrage, but please let's not mix personal and professional. What happened today is a family matter. It has nothing to do with Odette's work at your company. Osmond turned slowly toward him, and there was an expression on his face that I'd never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and anger. Nothing to do with it? He repeated. Young man, everything in this world is connected. How we treat our family says more about us than any job interview, any resume. If a person doesn't respect his family, how will he respect his coworkers, customers, the company? He paused, allowing his words to reach everyone present. At Rivers Enterprises, we believe that a person's character is shown not in the office, but at home. Not in how he interacts with his boss, but in how he treats those who can't give him anything, the elderly, the weak, to those who need protection. Osmond turned to Odette, his voice formal. Ms. Huxley, I regret to inform you that your services are no longer required by Rivers Enterprises. Your dismissal is effective immediately. There was dead silence in the room. Odette turned pale, her eyes widening with shock. You can't, she breathed out. It's illegal. You can't fire me for what happened in my own house. You're still on probation. Your contract provides for termination without cause within the first 3 months. But I'm not hiding the reason. I'm firing you for behavior inconsistent with our company values. He turned to the guests. Again, I apologize for causing embarrassment. But I believe that some things are more important than social conventions. Respect for elders is one of them. The guests began to glance around, and some began to quietly gather to leave. The tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Odette stood frozen in place, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Then suddenly she came to life, her face contorted with anger. It's all a setup, she said, pointing her finger at me. He planned the whole thing, called his director friend, told him stories about what a horrible daughter-in-law I was, and he rushed to the poor old man's defense. She turned to Bryce, tears of anger in her eyes. And you, did you know about this? Knew that your father was friends with my boss? That he could ruin my career at any moment? Bryce looked lost, torn between his wife and the nightmare at hand. Odette, I just found out today that Dad knows Mr. Rivers. And you didn't tell me? Her voice broke into a scream. Let me make a fool of myself. Let me lose my job. Odette, please. Bryce tried to take her hand, but she recoiled. Don't touch me. You're just like him. Always on his side. Always put him before me. She turned to the rest of the guests, many of whom were already clearly wishing they'd left earlier. Do you all see this? Do you see what's happening? I'm being fired because of a family dispute, because I dared to speak my mind in my own home. No one answered. The guests averted their eyes, not wanting to get involved in this unpleasant scene. Odette looked at Osmond, her eyes narrowed. You will regret this, she said quietly but firmly. I'll sue you for wrongful termination, for discrimination, for invasion of privacy. Osmond looked completely unperturbed in the face of her threats. You're free to proceed as you see fit, he said. Our lawyers will be ready, but I would think carefully if I were you. A trial is a public affair. All the details of tonight's proceedings will be made public. Are you ready for potential employers to know how you treat your father-in-law? Odette opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't find the words. Her face reddened with anger and humiliation. She turned to Bryce, tears in her eyes. Do something, she whispered. Make it stop. Bryce looked like he was being torn apart. He looked from his wife to Osmond to me and back again, not knowing what to say, what to do. Mr. Rivers, he said at last, I understand your indignation, but please don't make any hasty decisions. Odette, she's a good person. It's just that my father and I have a complicated relationship, and sometimes it doesn't come out in the best way. Osmond looked at Bryce with an expression that could only be described as sympathy mixed with disappointment. I don't doubt that your wife can be a good person in other circumstances, he said, but I saw what happened today, and it wasn't just a coming out of a difficult relationship. It was the deliberate humiliation of an elderly man, your father, in front of everyone. He paused, looking Bryce straight in the eye. And the sad thing is, you did nothing to stop it. Those words felt like they hit Bryce. He recoiled as if from a physical blow, his face contorted with sudden realization. In that moment, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Understanding. An understanding of his role in everything that had happened, in what had been happening all these years. Odette, seeing the change in her husband's face, felt she was losing her last ally. Her face contorted with anger and despair. Don't you dare, she hissed. Don't you dare give in to them. They're manipulating you, don't you see? Your father's always done it, always trying to control you, telling you how to live your life. She turned to me, her eyes burning with hatred. Are you satisfied? She shouted. Satisfied that you've ruined everything I've built? My career, my reputation, my home? I didn't answer. What could I say? That I didn't want it to come to this? That would be a lie. Part of me really wanted it to. Wanted her to feel a fraction of the humiliation I'd felt all these years. My silence seemed to anger Odette even more. She turned to Bryce, her voice breaking with emotion. You have to choose, she said. Right now, them or me, your father and his powerful friend who just ruined my career, or your wife. Bryce looked like he'd been cornered. His eyes darted back and forth between us, opening and closing his mouth, unable to find the words. Odette, he finally said, don't make me make that choice. Not now. Not like this. Her face contorted, as if she'd heard something she hadn't expected, as if she'd been sure up until that moment that Bryce would always choose her, no matter what. So it's like this, she whispered. You choose them. No, But she wasn't listening anymore. The tears she'd been holding back all this time finally broke through. She turned and ran out of the room, sobbing loudly. Bryce made a move to follow her, but stopped, glaring at me and at Osmond. He looked completely lost, as if the ground had gone out from under his feet. Go, I said quietly. She's your wife. She needs you. He stared at me for a few seconds, his eyes a mixture of gratitude and pain. Then he nodded and went to get Odette. There was an awkward silence in the room. The guests who were still left began to gather quietly. No one wanted to stay in the scene of this family drama. An elderly couple I had noticed earlier in the evening approached me. We are very sorry for what happened, the woman said quietly. We didn't know. We didn't realize the situation was so complicated. I nodded gratefully. What else could I say? Thank you for your understanding, I replied, and I apologize for witnessing this scene. They expressed their sympathy once more and headed for the exit. The other guests followed, casting awkward glances at me and Osmond. After a few minutes, it was just the two of us in the living room. Osmond went to the bar and poured himself another scotch. Then after a moment's thought, he poured a second glass and handed it to me. I think you need this as much as I do, he said. I accepted the glass and took a sip. The alcohol burned my throat, but it was almost pleasant, a physical sensation that distracted me from the emotional pain. You shouldn't have done that, I said. Osmond looked at me in surprise. Do what exactly? Fire her, ruin her career. She deserved to be reprimanded, but not that. Osmond shook his head. You're too soft-hearted, Will. You always have been. This woman has poisoned your relationship with your son for years. Today she publicly humiliated you, shoved you out the door like an unwanted guest, and you're still defending her?" I shrugged, not knowing what to say. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really am too soft. Or maybe I'm just tired of conflict. From the second floor came the sounds of an argument, the muffled voices of Bryce and Odette. Their words were indistinguishable, but the tone left no doubt that there was a serious conflict going on. "What do you think will happen next?" I asked, nodding toward the sounds. "I don't know," Osmond answered honestly. "But whatever happens, Bryce will have to make a choice. A real choice, not just a choice to sit on two chairs." I nodded, realizing he was right. All these years, Bryce had tried to please everyone. Me, Odette, his own ideas of what a good son and husband should be. As a result, he was truly neither. The voices upstairs grew louder, then suddenly quieted. A few seconds later, there was the sound of quick footsteps on the stairs, and Odette flew into the living room. Her face was red with tears, her eyes puffy. She glared at us fiercely, but didn't say a word, walked quickly across the room, and ran out of the house, slamming the front door loudly. A minute later, Bryce appeared on the stairs. He looked haggard, as if he had aged 10 years in the last hour. "She's gone to her parents," he said, not looking at me or Osmond. "Said she wouldn't come back until I'd made up my mind between her and everything else." He sank down on the couch, hiding his face in his hands. "What have I done?" he muttered. "What have we all done?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if there was even a right answer in a situation like this. The housewarming party had turned into a nightmare that would probably change the lives of all of us forever. I got home well past midnight. Osmond offered me a ride, but I preferred to walk. I needed to get my thoughts in order. The night air of Garden City was fresh and clear, and the stars looked down from the sky as blankly as ever. The world continued to exist, despite the little drama that had played out tonight at my son's house. My apartment greeted me with silence and darkness. I turned on the light in the hallway, took off my coat, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't feel like drinking. It was just a familiar ritual, something ordinary to hold on to in this evening full of upheaval. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the picture of Elizabeth that stood on the windowsill. What would she say about tonight? Would she approve of my actions or disapprove? Elizabeth had always been the voice of reason in our family, the restraining force behind my sometimes overly harsh decisions. "You crossed the line, Will." I could almost hear her voice. "Using your friendship with Osmond to get back at your sister-in-law? That's not like you." She would be right. It really wasn't like me. In my entire life, I had never sought to hurt anyone, even those who hurt me. I'd always believed in dialogue, in finding common ground. But with Odette, it was different. From the beginning, she saw me as an enemy, a rival in the struggle to influence Bryce. And gradually I began to think she was right. We were really on opposite sides of the barricades. After Elizabeth's death, things only got worse. Odette must have decided that now that my main protector was gone, it was time to pull me away from my son. And she almost succeeded. Almost, if it hadn't been for tonight. I replayed the events of the housewarming party in my head, the humiliation I'd felt when Odette had publicly kicked me out the door. My call to Osmond, his arrival and his unexpectedly harsh reaction. Odette's dismissal and her tantrum. Bryce, frozen between us, not knowing who to choose. Was it justice or just revenge? And if revenge, was it justified? I couldn't find answers to those questions. Part of me felt satisfied that Odette had finally gotten what she deserved for her years of neglecting me. But another part felt ashamed that I had stooped to her level, using power and connections to hurt her. More importantly, what would happen to Bryce? To my only son, the one I loved more than life, against all odds? I didn't know how long I sat like that, looking at Elizabeth's picture and asking questions that had no answers. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. I looked at the clock, almost 3 in the morning. Who could have come at this hour? Opening the door, I saw Bryce. He looked exhausted. Wrinkled clothes, red eyes, stubble on his cheeks. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, with confusion and something akin to fear. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped back silently, letting him into the apartment. We walked into the kitchen, and I automatically put the kettle on. Bryce sat at the table, staring into the void in front of him. "How's Odette?" I asked, breaking the silence. "At her parents'," he answered, not looking up. "She won't talk to me. Said I betrayed her." I nodded, not knowing what to say. The kettle boiled, and I made tea and set 2 cups on the table. Bryce wrapped his palm around mine, as if trying to get warm, even though the apartment was warm. "Why did you do that, Dad?" he asked finally, looking up at me. "Why did you call Osmond? Why did you put on this whole spectacle?" I wondered. What could I say? That I'd been hurt and humiliated by Odette's behavior? That I'd endured her neglect for years and finally snapped? It would all sound like an excuse. "I didn't plan for it to turn out this way," I said finally. "When I called Osmond, I just wanted to share with a friend. I didn't expect him to react so forceful." "Don't lie," Bryce shook his head. "You knew exactly what he'd do. You knew how principled he was about respecting his elders. You knew he ran the company where Odette worked. You had it all figured out." I didn't say anything. Maybe he was right. Maybe somewhere in the back of my mind I really had counted on this outcome. Maybe that's why I called Osmond instead of someone else. "You ruined her career," Bryce continued. "A career she was so proud of. A place she'd earned through her ability and hard work." "That's not entirely true," I countered. "She'd only been at Osmond for a few weeks. Hardly a career to speak of." "It's not about timing," Bryce raised his voice. "The point is that you used your connections to get back at her, to punish her for not inviting you to the housewarming party." "Why didn't she invite me?" I asked, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. "Why did your father, your only surviving bloodline, hear about the house purchase from the neighbors? Why wasn't I invited to a party where even casual acquaintances were gathered?" Bryce averted his eyes. You know why? You and Odette never got along." "Whose fault is that?" I tried to speak calmly, but it wasn't working. "From the beginning, from the first day you brought her to meet us, she looked at me as a liability, like a rival. She systematically alienated you from me, and you let her do it." Bryce was silent, staring into his cup. Then he looked up, and I saw so much pain in his eyes that my heart clenched. "I loved you both," he said quietly. "I tried to make everyone happy, but I never could. I always had to choose, and no matter what the choice was, someone was left hurting." I knew what he was talking about. There was an unspoken war between me and Odette for his attention, his love, his loyalty. And he was always caught between 2 fires, trying to please everyone. "After Mom died," Bryce continued, "I thought you'd understand how important it was for me to have a family of my own. How important it is to build a relationship with Odette without the constant presence of the past. But you didn't, or didn't want to understand." "The past?" I interjected. "Is that what I've become to you? The past? Something to leave behind?" Bryce sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't overreact. That's not what I meant. It's just, Odette wanted us to live our own lives, to build something of our own, instead of constantly looking over our shoulders at the Huxley family. And you agreed with her, decided that the traditions you grew up in, the values your mom and I tried to instill in you, all of that had to be thrown away for something of your own." We stared at each other across the table, and I suddenly realized that there was a chasm between us that grew wider with every word, a gap we'd both been creating for years, me with my unwillingness to let him go, him with his desire to please everyone at once. "I didn't come here to argue," Bryce said after a long pause. "I came to ask you to talk to Osmond, to convince him to put Odette back to work." I stared at my son, not believing my ears. "Are you serious? After everything she's done? After the way she publicly humiliated me? You expect me to beg for her?" "I expect you to act like a father," Bryce replied, a note of steel in his voice. "Like a man who loves his son and wants him to be happy." "Are you happy with her?" I asked quietly. "Truly happy with a woman who tries to cut you off from your roots? Who sees your father as the enemy?" Bryce didn't answer right away. He looked past me, as if trying to find the answer somewhere in the space of the kitchen. "I was happy," he said finally, "until tonight, until you and Osmond destroyed everything Odette and I had built." His words hit me like a slap in the face. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really had been selfishly meddling in his life without thinking of the consequences. "She'll change," Bryce continued. "I'll talk to her. I'll explain that she was wrong, that I need to treat you with respect. But to do that, I need your help. I need you to talk to Osmond." I was silent, looking at my son. He seemed so sure he could change Odette, make her treat me differently. But I knew it was an illusion. Odette wouldn't change. She could pretend for a while, she could play the role of loving daughter-in-law, but the first chance she got, it would be back to the way it was. "No," I said at last. "I'm not going to ask Osmond to give her her job back." Bryce looked at me in disbelief, as if he didn't recognize his own father. "You refuse to help me? Your son?" "I refuse to participate in the farce," I replied. "The pretense that everything could be fixed with one conversation." Odette had spent years demonstrating that I was nothing to her, that my feelings, my rights as your father, mean nothing. And tonight she crossed the line. Bryce stood up, his face white with anger. "You haven't changed," he said quietly. "It always has to be your way. Always your truth above all others." "Not true, and you know it," I stood up too. "I've always been able to admit my mistakes, always been willing to compromise. But there are some things I can't cross, and disrespect is one of them." We stood across from each other, father and son, bound by blood, but separated by a chasm of mutual resentment and misunderstanding. In that moment, I suddenly saw Bryce as a young man, just as stubborn, just as sure of his rightness, and just as unwilling to listen to the voice of experience. "Then there's nothing more to discuss," Bryce said, heading for the exit. "I was hoping you'd understand, that you'd remember what it was like to love someone enough to do anything for them." "I remember," I replied. "That's why I can't do what you're asking me to do. Because I love you and I don't want you to live in a relationship built on lies and pretense." Bryce stopped in the doorway without turning around. "Then you're going to have to accept that I'm choosing Odette, that I'm choosing the future over the past. If that's your choice, I'll accept it," I said, feeling something finally break inside. "But don't ask me to pretend that I agree with it." Bryce didn't answer. He walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of the front door of the entryway slamming shut. And silence, the deafening silence of the empty apartment. I went back to the kitchen and sat at the table, staring at the cooled tea in Bryce's cup. Revenge had been exacted. Odette had gotten what she deserved for years of humiliation and neglect. But the price had been too high. I may have lost my son forever. Was I right? Was my pride, my sense of justice, worth the sacrifice? I didn't know. Maybe years from now, looking back, I'll find the answer to that question. Or maybe I wouldn't. A few days later, I was sitting with Osmond in our usual pub. He had ordered us a beer, as always, and was now telling us about some new project of his company. I listened, half listening, my mind going back to the conversation I'd had with Bryce the night before. "Hey, are you listening to me?" Osmond snapped his fingers in front of my face. "Where are you hovering?" "Sorry," I sipped my beer. "Just thinking about Bryce." Osmond nodded understandingly. "He called me yesterday, asked me to get his wife back to work." "And what did you say?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That I couldn't do it." Osmond shrugged his shoulders. "That it was a matter of principle, that to compromise on such things was to betray one's own values." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and bitterness. "He must have been angry." "He was," Osmond grinned. "Said I was a stubborn old man like you, that you and I deserved each other." We both laughed, though it was not a happy laugh. "Maybe he's right," I said. "Maybe we really are too stubborn, holding on to our principles too tightly." "Is that a bad thing?" Osmond looked at me seriously. "Isn't that what we taught our children? To stand up for what you believe in?" "Yes, but—" I hesitated. "But sometimes I wonder what's more important, to be right or to be happy." Osmond looked at me for a long time, then sipped his beer and put the mug on the table. "You know what I think," he said. "I think it's impossible to be truly happy if you've betrayed your principles, if you put up with disrespect, with neglect, just to keep up the appearance of a relationship." I nodded, realizing he was right, and at the same time feeling the pain of knowing that I might never see my son again. Bryce will be back, Osmond said, as if reading my thoughts. Maybe not right away. Maybe he'll need time to sort himself out, to figure out his relationship. But he'll come back, because blood isn't just a word. It's a bond that no amount of fighting can break. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Bryce would one day realize that I wasn't acting out of petty revenge, but out of a belief that some things shouldn't go unpunished. That respect wasn't just a polite formality, but the foundation of any healthy relationship. To justice, Osmond raised his mug. However bitter it may be. I raised my own mug, clinking it with his. To justice, I repeated, feeling the bitterness of loss and satisfaction that Odette had gotten what she deserved, and to the price we were paying for her.